Welcome to Screen Tones, a webcomic podcast. This episode is our pilot ep where we talk about where we each get our inspiration from to tell our own webcomics, while we also figure out how the heck to host a podcast. So please stick around.
Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams untrue!
It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great.
It happened. I was joking, but this is fine.
I like the laughing intro. This is just really great.
Yeah, just laughing and nothing
pilot
else.
Episode. I guess we should start with a topic.
Weren't we doing influences?
Yes, we were. Should we do an intro? This is the pilot episode. All right,
We'll do it live.
Yeah. Dolphin noise there.
You'll edit this out, right?
Welcome to the pilot episode of Screen Tones, a webcomic podcast. My name is Krispy. I use she, they pronouns, and I make ghost junk sickness.
I'm Varethane, and I work on the webcomic Witchwood.
I'm Renie. I work on the webcomic Cape Blast, and I use she, her pronouns.
And I am Ray. I work on the comic Overlord of Ravenfell and on Empyrean High.
So today, and tonight, only tonight, is going to be our first unofficial podcast that we're going to attempt to have fun with. And we're going to talk about influences tonight. It's going to be real. Like, we're going to be talking about the conception, where our minds expanded and exploded to make the comics that we do now. I'm gonna throw you right under the bus, Renie, and I'm gonna force you to go first.
So my influences are freaking all over the place, but I think the biggest things, at least, that influence the style and the tone of my comic work in general is a lot of like the anime I liked growing up and the anime I would have liked growing up if I had actually found it. So a lot of retro anime, like Evangelion is the big one. Sailor Moon's up there. Slayers is a recent find that I absolutely love the styling of Tenchi Muyo. So it's like a lot of those, like that era of anime that had a very specific look and feel.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to combine that with a little bit more of the bombastic storytelling used by Studio Trigger with a lot less fan service. So that's where a lot of it comes from me, is just getting that nostalgia without being a nostalgia comic, because I desperately don't want to be like, oh, I'm just doing the retro, haha, nostalgia, because that's just no.
It's like a respectful nod to the work that inspires you.
Yes, exactly. Without trying to be referential.
Oh, 100%. I think that's awesome, and I definitely see that reflected in Kate the Blasto. I definitely see that, like, quote unquote classic anime realness. I think you did a wonderful job. Excellent. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it, Mr. Krabs. I'm gonna go down the line, and I'm going to now select you, Ray, from the pumpkin patch.
My.
Oh yes. What are your references for the comics that you've made?
Okay, so probably the most obvious reference for me is Clamp, because, I'm basic. But Clamp was a huge influence for me. It was like the first manga that I really read was Rick Vetta, which not a lot of people know of as far as Clamp's stuff. They mostly think Cardcaptor Sakura or Tsubasa, Chobits and stuff like that. But Um, I like the ones that they make that break your heart.
The feels pain train.
The feels, pains, their tragedies. I love that they do shoujo, but they also just go into really dark places. So that's probably one of my main influences. Slayers is a big influence for me too. For Ravenfell in particular, Kyokara Mao is also a big influence. And also just I know Kaori Yuki, Watase, and all those like classic shoujo mangaka have been pretty big and prominent in my work. Um, but also like video games like Breath of
Yes.
Fire and Final Fantasy and like the Sega Genesis Fantasy Stars and stuff like that are also pretty huge influences.
I
Just
love the way that you implement like the influences that you've told me into, especially Ravenfell, just because that's the one that's released right now. Seeing the Slayer's influence and the Clamp with the style and stuff like that, and like I said before, I think I love that respectful nod to your inspirations. I think that's something to aspire to, definitely.
I feel like I just toss everything into a blender and let it do its own thing.
I mean, that's the best way to do it, eh?
I mean, be like, I like this part, so I'll use this.
Comics.
Comics.
I'm now going to be asking Thane of the group with this question about the influences of your work.
This is a question where my answer has changed considerably over the years because Witchwood is actually my second webcomic, and I feel like for each thing that I create, when I try to think about like what influenced me, I'm always going to be thinking about it from the lens of like whatever my current project is, and it came in a funny trajectory for me because I grew up watching, reading and watching a lot of superhero stories, and I was super into X-Men Evolution as a kid. And then when I got a little older, went into high school and stuff, I discovered Inuyasha, which was like my gateway to the rest of the wild world of anime. And I was obsessed ever since then. Especially like there's so many like tropes in it that I'd never seen done before, or like never seen done quite in that way. And I just loved like the storytelling style. I started devouring like everything by Rumiko Takahashi, and then just kind of reading everything else I could get my hands on. So that kind of formed a big part of the inspiration for my first webcomic, Geralt, as well as a video game called Jack and Daxter, and an indie comic series from the 70s called ElfQuest, which I was super duper into as a teen as well. Um, and then once I finished my first webcomic, I actually kind of went back to my roots a little bit, because Witchwood was a story that I started turning over way, way back in like middle school, back when I was still primarily influenced by superhero stories of all things. And while I wouldn't call Witchwood a superhero story, I feel like the X-Men Evolution roots are still just
Mm.
barely visible in the
Mhm.
work if you squint.
Mhm.
Um, but I mean, it's also just kind of all blended together with a little bit of everything else that I've like experienced and enjoyed since then. So it's got a huge helping of anime and like a nice slice of video games. Um, Final Fantasy, I think, is probably
Can't
also a
escape it.
factor. Yeah, it's funny because I never played a ton of the Final Fantasy games up until very recently, but because I've been aware of them for so long and so many of my peers were so into it, like the aesthetic was inescapable. And like I watched Advent Children without playing the game that it was based on, and I was just obsessed with the look, like the look and feel. So I was like, I want to do things like this. Um, anyway, that's my current answer.
I
Ask
mean,
me again in a year, it'll change.
That's how they do. That's how they do. They're just like, oh no, it was this actually all along. When you discover something new and it just kind of morphs into another set of influences.
Or when you're just like, oh shit, this story is pretty much based off of this one that I read a long time ago.
Yes, like that influence tunnel.
Like I was working on my necromancer story that I want to eventually do, and I was looking at it and I'm like, oh shit, this is just Rick Vetta with a necromancer.
I had that recently too, where like the next comic idea that I want to do, which is kind of a dumb space adventure. A bunch of us were watching Space D&D, and I was like, "Oh yes, I want this energy."
Chaotic and just energetic and random and wild, but still cohesive somehow.
Yes, somehow.
I thought I had gotten away.
Yeah.
I really thought I got away from the superhero influences. And
yes.
then the more I look at my current work, I'm like, oh no, it's still there. It's been there the whole time. You can't escape.
So, Krispy, what about you and your influences?
Me, the Crisp? Too many. Next. So the current project that we're working on, I work on Ghost Junk with my sister, Space Rockabunny. And that is one of those long haul, holy heck, it's been in production for a while, and we're finally doing live now. 7 years old, and so the influences are definitely like kind of all over the map with what we've taken from whatever to kind of put into that. But the main ones that definitely stick out are Final Fantasy. Specifically Final Fantasy VII. The setting, the way that they develop the characters and the themes are something that we really consider when writing the story, as well as Cowboy Bebop, again with the setting. The thematic episode nature that they have in the series is something that is kind of a cornerstone of the work that we do. We do a lot of things supremely thematically. That's just how we write. And again, it's in space and it's sci-fi. It's great. We also are very, very inspired by the darker tones that Full Metal Alchemist has, and I think that's just a very, again, large part of the work. And of course, Trigun, massive influence with that. Dark themes. The manga has amazing ink work, something I aspire to be still by today, and it's just the pacing, the design, everything kind of like that all bundled in one. And actually going back to the discussion that we had right before I answered this question, with new influences, Doro Heidoro is definitely something that's kind of on the table now that I've recently seen it. It's kind of like, oh, this is another thing to kind of look forward to and take from now, and that's exciting. I think it's great. Delving into media all over the place will still influence your work, and the great thing about webcomics is because they're transformative, they're slowly developing along as you tell the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I was thinking when I was watching Dragon Goes House Hunting, like, this is the kind of stuff that I like, is why I made Ravenfell. It's like I like the whole like looking at a fantasy setting and be like, well, what if you just turn it on its head?
Yeah, the quirky charm of it all definitely is captured in Ravenfell. And I do appreciate that you went that route. It's something you don't see a lot in webcomic worlds, and I think you do that very well.
The classic comedy. It's great.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just more fun to make a character that's really bad at something.
I mean,
frequently.
I think that's like not webcomics, but like that's why like the shows like the Venture Brothers are so popular, because I think the creator of the Venture Brothers said that every single character in that show is terrible at what they do, and that's what makes them compelling.
I mean, that's so true for storytelling. I mean, not to be controversial here on our first episode.
Controversy?
Here?
You want controversy?
Time for
I love how prepared you were. And this is the first episode. Oh my god.
I have the sound. I just have the soundboard up. I need to get. I need to
It's
get
from
it
you, son of a-
right.
Finger on the
Wow.
But wow. One thing that, like, now I'm gonna go with your Venture Brothers statement, is the fact that it's just like people don't read stories that are perfect. It's just there's nothing that happens in a story that is perfect. I mean, especially with something that's like a relationship. I mean, if someone is the base of the story is that they're perfect and they get along perfectly and nothing bad happens and there's nothing between them that has any kind of conflict and there's no adversity to anything. It's just like, why am I here? I mean, like, not every story obviously has to have that, but give me something to look at. And
I feel like more so than necessarily needing conflict, what you kind of need is a challenge to throw at
Yes.
the characters. Like what you want to see is not somebody dealing with everything completely perfectly all the time, but like show that they have to work a little for the
Mm-hmm.
things that they want. Show that they're maybe they struggle sometimes, or they just try really hard, and it doesn't necessarily, you don't get everything that you want on the first try super easily all
No.
the time.
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Like you can have your power fantasies and still have complexity in like the things that they face. Like one of the most frustrating animes I've ever watched was building up to this big battle that was over in 10 seconds.
Twilight? Was it Twilight?
No.
Well, I mean, that reminds me, like the 10 seconds thing, like a show like One Punch Man, where like canonically the main character is so strong that he just defeats everything in a single punch, but it doesn't come across as dull because they've put the challenges in somewhere else. Like you find
And
that
that's
he's super bored.
literally his
Mm.
problem, is because he can beat everyone. He's bored out of his mind.
Yeah. I think it's just like the point of the challenges is really just to put the characters in a spot that they are unfamiliar with and just see how they react, like a
Mm.
fly on the wall. So
Yeah.
that's like, so I think that's why people get hung up on conflict of, oh, it has to be this big action fight. Of no, like you could put like put a welder in a bake shop, and that's conflict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It could be
show
anything
try
and
something that's
everything.
hard for them.
Yeah, big agree.
Yeah, like this one webcomic that I read occasionally, it's a gaming comic, gasp. Is pretty much about like the big macho guys from video games trying to get rehabilitated into normal life.
Oh,
I
that's
love
kind
that
of
comic.
interesting.
I know the comic, it's so good.
It is good.
I did have a question for the group, and it's how do you have those respectful nods to your influences in your work without being ham fisted?
Okay, for me, it's just a matter of quantity of influences. I feel like the more that you take from, the less apparent it's going to be, like what you're taking from,
Mm.
as well as just the fact that your preferences are always going to show through, and they're not always going to perfectly align with what you consume. So your story is pretty much always going to be yours because you're doing what you want as opposed to consuming something that someone else has made.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the way I try to use influences is it's less about like putting in references specifically. This might be related to the type of stories that I tend to tell, but when I'm inspired by something, I try to like dig a little deeper into the story and kind of look at what the themes are and the specific tropes and why those might be resonating with me. I spend a lot of time on TV Tropes, the website, which I think is just a great place to kind of look at, especially if you like thinking about media. And one of my favorite things that it does is if you go to the page for like something that you're super duper into, like, oh, I don't know, for just off the top of my head, I don't know, maybe X-Men Evolution, you can look and you can see all these different tropes listed that are things that have happened in that show, like type character archetypes that reoccur, or like very dramatic plot twists that have happened and stuff like that. And you can click through to the page for that trope, and then you can see a whole bunch of other series that kind of did a similar thing but different. So you can look at your, the thing in the story that you watched or read or played and were like, oh, that's incredible, I love that, I want to do something that hits other people like that. And then you can actually find other stories that have done similar things but different, and you kind of read I like to go and read those things too, because they've probably also done something that I'll greatly enjoy. And once you start kind of reading widely in the range that you're into, you can kind of start to see like the commonalities and like figure out, here are the broader themes that I can put into my own thing. And the thing with themes is that they're a lot of them, not all of them, but many of them are pretty like universal, and they tend to be so broad that you can play with the same theme as your favorite story, and it's not copying, and it's not even necessarily a reference. Somebody might read your whole story and never even realize that it was inspired by this thing, but secretly in your heart of hearts. Those are my thoughts on it.
I think that's such a good like kind of callback to like TV tropes, using that as an example, especially when like trying to find out like the medias that's similar with tropes. I think it's just, as a writer, to kind of understand how to use them and what they're for and stuff like that. Even if you don't quote unquote use them, you might actually you probably are using them without knowing. And I think it's just good to like reference media the different ways. I think that's a good tool. To answer the question myself, I think the root of getting references or the material that inspires you is to understand the source material from the actual beginning. Because one person could say that they're inspired by Magic Knight Rayearth and say that say that, oh yeah, I'm inspired by Magic Knight Rayearth because it's all about girls fighting with swords and mech. And I will first of all be like, it's not. But second of all, I will be like, but did you understand the theme of it? The theme of that kind of, I guess, love and acceptance, actually. And changing the world with your own will is a huge theme in the entirety of the story that is missed when you say that it's just girls fighting with swords and mecha. And I think that that's a very appropriate way to use those as your influences. Previously, I said that Ghost Junk was very inspired by the writing of Cowboy Bebop, and it's in how they handle the themes in each episode that we also implement the same kind of system where you have, like I said, a theme that's going to be consistent throughout the episode, and the character learns or changes or has new information at the end that adheres to a bigger story. And it was just something that we take from that. And actually, like, again, with that awesome point of getting more different influences that, you know, go with your work, Avatar: The Last Airbender is wonderful for that, where everything has a point, a purpose, a theme, and then it, you know, aids to a bigger, larger kind of story. And it was just something that we were really inspired from with how that did that. So I think just understanding the way that it's created for the purpose that it is created for really, really helps to kind of slip that reference in, slip those inspirations in without people being like, wow, there it is.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo the understanding the source material for your references, because There's nothing worse than doing the big, this is a Evangelion reference, wink, and then completely missing the point. Like at least using Evangelion for that example is like so many. Read so many critics online of just like, oh, Shinji's a bad hero, and I'm like, that's the point. Shinji doesn't want to be there. And so it's like understanding that material is so good, and then being able to not only understand that but also be able to take it and make it your own, because you can't just what worked for, like in Krispy's example, Magic Knight Rare, like what works in that comic might not, like if you took it and plopped it in a different story, it might not work if you just carbon copy it. So you really have to like try and like sculpt it almost into fitting your work. And like it has to be this relationship with your work, not just having your work just like, okay, they're gonna just shout, get in the robot, Kate, and it's gonna be hollow. You have to look at the feeling of what that moment in the source material did, what it made you feel, as well as like understanding the point that it was trying to make, so that you can be like, okay, what is the point I'm trying to make, and how do I get the feel that I really want to reference here. And just keeping that in mind as you're crafting that.
Yeah, Ray made a really, really good point about that too, about just your story will be your own. No matter what you do, what you make with it, it will still, regardless of everything that's in it, will be your own. And I think that's the pinnacle of creating any of this stuff. But one thing I did want to talk about, maybe in the future, it's a huge other topic, but I think knowing and understanding your influences, I think, is hand in hand. It's hand in hand with understanding the audience that you create for. And that's like the deeper dive into, understanding the source material as well. It's just like, if someone really enjoyed XYZ, this is how you're going to reach them. If you could make those parts that really emphasize the brilliance of the pieces that you like, and make them shine, and you will gather audiences that kind of, also like that thing. It's a big other different topic to gauge the audience that way, but I think it's just something, little nugget to consider with this whole influence thing. It's broad, baby. How did we want to end this?
Bye, slappers.
Bye, slappers.
That's it, y'all.
Signing off, slappers.
Despite everything, it's still you.
Thank you so much for listening to the pilot episode of Screen Tones. Please subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at ScreenTonesCast.